welcome and thank you very much for being with us at BRICS Africa channel. Let's look at the historical context and the significance in the global politics and economy, the significance of South Africa, Russia, China, and India. What is it about these countries that made them kind of come together, looking at the time they did?
Yes. The term BRICS, or BRIC at the beginning, which was Brazil, Russia, India, and China, was coined by the Goldman Sachs economist, Jim O'Neill. In 2001, what he was looking at, because BRICS has gone beyond its original purpose and the coinage by Jim O'Neill. As an economist, O'Neill was looking at economies that were growing within their own rationale, that the West was losing control in those economies. They were no longer dependent on the whims and likings of the West. They had developed into their own systems, into their own engine. And if the West had some impact, those impacts will be minimal. That explains something for you. That is why then we have Brazil, which was doing very well at the time. We have Russia, which was going through its own throughs after the Soviet Union, but it was showing a formidable growth. You have India, which had strong relations with the West, but the inner economic rationale of India's growth belonged to India. And then China, we know the story of China since 1978 with the shift from planned economy to market-oriented economy. Now, that is where Africa was excluded, because at the time, 2000, 2001, we had beautiful growth in East Africa and in some parts of Central Africa. But what lacked was the rationale and the system of economy that will be independent from the West totally, or rather from the Bretton Woods institutes. So the exclusion of Africa was not by design, but it was the impact of global economic conditionalities around the African continent. But then when BRICS started and there was growth, any economic formation needs markets. Any economic formation needs resources. That's where Africa comes in. But my own analysis of what I've just explained, that it was growth that was quasi-independent from the West or totally independent from the West in terms of China and Russia. What we are looking at, that can also explain the choice of South Africa. South Africa might have gotten in within the rationale that it was going to be the gateway to Africa. But what has happened with this beautiful structure, South Africa is not only the gateway, but South Africa has developed to become the handler or the pillar or the representative of African countries, especially Southern Africa going further. Mm-hmm. So that is the historical patterns or the historical background of BRICS. And BRICS was created then as a vehicle for development, as a vehicle for alternative, not for for alternative type of development that is ideal to the global South. That is, in a nutshell, that is the background for BRICS.
But what is unique? What is so unique about the global South that it was necessary to come together and establish a club like BRICS? What is it? Why not operate within existing kind of dynamics? Why set up that kind of alternative?
Look, history can be very slow. Even when our consciousness tells us this is fair We ought to do this, but history tends to be slow. In order to have continuities, you need a rupture. So that's what BRICS did. Remember that BRICS come at the turn of 21st century. But what has happened before then? More than half a century, all these countries, China, the inception of China was in 1949, which gives us exactly 50 years. Independent African states, the independence of Brazil as a new economy. So 50 years had gone by in majority of these regions, but they were still kept at the periphery. If we talk about Global South, one of the biggest meetings about the Global South, it was the Bandung Conference in 1955, which also is another half a century. So those ideals, they were talks about what can be done. But Sukarno put it beautifully. We no longer have to ask for permission for us to execute in our own nations. But that was in 1955. BRICS is formed in the year 2000. So that's why I say history can be slow. You have an ideal, you have a dream, but there are no tools to systematize that. First, it was because the Global South was left in the periphery. But terms of engagement and conditions of engagement continued to be those similar or that reflected colonial past in one way or another. Transitions from colonialism or from imperialism to policy sovereign, to economic sovereign, or to sovereignty of a given nation, those things had not taken place practically. Some had taken place on paper, but people still had to kowtow. For example, West Africa had to kowtow to France. Some regions of the world, they were by default indebted to specific masters. So BRICS broke that out because numbers don't lie. When Jim O'Neill comes and say, look, at the rate that these regions with these leaders as, for example, when we say China within BRICS, is not only in reference of China as a nation state, but in China as a region, even those peripheral spaces that are around China. When we speak of Brazil, we speak of Paraguay, we speak of all these other South American countries that have biggest trade. So Jim O'Neill sees this, given time, these nations are going to be independent from existing systems anyway. So why don't we start regarding them as a special case? He never said, let's build a system, let them build a system. He was warning. That's what professors do. That's what people who do prognosis do. You look at the future. You create, there's a tendency of putting your analysis being event-based. Oh, this happened, so and so said this. But then within that, you must create your own future-based scenarios. For example, we can put one now. What if BRICS succeeds? The two main themes for this summit is the BRICS payment systems and is the joining of new members. What value will these new members bring? That will then determine the future of BRICS. But then, for argument's sake, or for positivity's sake, let's say BRICS succeeds totally. Will there be polarity within the Bretton Woods systems and the newly emerged economic systems, which are not anti-Bretton Woods, but they are trying to rationalize their own system? So we can say that in the last 50 years of the 20th century, it was an abstraction of an ideal of development. But the turn of the 21st century, then gives us time to rationalize. And I think this kid has grown now, this kid called BRICS. We are now at the stage of starting implementation. And why this summit is important, so important, is because this is the systemization and putting of tools in place to be able to carry on implementation.
Mm-hmm. So we've spoken about the historical kind of context. In your view, what has been until now? What has been like the major kind of successes of BRICS? What is it that BRICS has achieved, and how do you measure success as far as BRICS is concerned?
BRICS was an idea. Let's just start from BRIC. It was an idea of a possibility, looking at geopolitical developments and looking at economies within. Now, all of a sudden, there are these new kids on the block that were kept at the periphery of the system. So it means the first development was bringing in South Africa. Because like I mentioned before, that every framework, every formation needs markets if it deals with economy and economic development. Every framework beyond markets needs resources to drive this economic engine. So joining of South Africa, tapping into the resources, tapping into the by then looming African youth dividend was a stroke of genius. So I can say BRICS consolidated itself by bringing in South Africa. This was a stroke of genius. The next thing that happens then, after South Africa has joined, it is the formation of New Development Bank. So that is a sign that this is an economic formation. But even prior to the formation of the BRICS New Development Bank, we already had instruments in place that were supposed to cushion these national economies, which are member states of BRICS. We're looking at inflation. We're looking at strengthening currencies against the greenback. We're looking at enabling member states to be able to trade with their partners. So there were certain agreements. And the one which is the main one is the contingent reserve arrangement that exists until today, which is the most prominent engine and arrangement amongst countries. So this was sort of to bring at par the economies of BRICS member states. This was an instrument also, to some extent, which is related to South Africa, because criticism that came up was, why does South Africa join in terms of its demographics, in terms of its economy? But with CRA, this contingent reserve arrangement, it cushioned South Africa to be an equal member as well. So there are several other instruments that connect to CRA and the New Development Bank. Mm-hmm. New Development Bank facilitated several projects amongst BRICS member states. So that's a big development. But to rationalize the contingent reserve arrangement with the New Development Bank, there were some other loopholes or bottlenecks in the system. That this New Development Bank couldn't take it out itself outside some limiting spaces that are part and parcel of the Bretton Woods Institutes. So that's why from the early stages of the New Development Bank, one of the issues was the payment system. One of the issues is, how can we drive our projects without being dependent on the current existing payment systems, because anyway, they don't favor the global south. And by default, then it means these instruments do not favor BRICS. So that's why BRICS has been at wars with itself, but in a positive way, because they were at throws with itself because they were trying to build up a system. But there's been a misconception that BRICS is there to get rid of the Bretton Woods systems. For me to be independent from you doesn't mean that I'm against you. So that we have to put that clear first. That BRICS is not an anti-Western or anti-Bretton Woods systems. One of the objectives of BRICS is to establish and sustain development in the nations of the global south. That's number one. But at the same time, it is to reform global economic systems so that we are all at par. BRICS, as a result, why is it so attractive? It is attractive because it is inclusive. And this we see with what? We see with the new member states that have joined now. BRICS member states now are 10, with Ethiopia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, what was the other one? And Saudi Arabia. These ones are in place. Now, what happens? Now, you talk about development and achievements and how you measure those achievements. If we're dealing with economic issues, we'll deal in terms of GDP and PPP. Now, BRICS as it stands today, let's not talk about other applicants. BRICS as it stands today, it occupies 30%, or it's accountable for 30% of the world land. Secondly, it consists of 45% of global population. And in terms of international trade, BRICS has got a 20% share of international trade. And then the last one is that BRICS development, those are the measures that you want. When we talk about development of a country, we measure it in GDP, purchasing parity, power parity, and all that. BRICS GDP today goes beyond that of the G7. And if you put the G7, those are people who are leading the world, or were supposed to lead the world, to be the world economic leaders. But BRICS formation currently, present as you speak, its GDP goes beyond that of the G7. Now, here's a scenario, which is a yippee for BRICS. There are 34 new applicants that want to join BRICS. We can start from Bolivia in Latin America all the way to Turkey. Now, that's another quagmire. If you're on the negative side of BRICS, then joining of Turkey is a quagmire. Mm-hmm. Turkey has got two straits, which is a passage between Asia and Europe. Turkey is not a member of NATO, but NATO depends on Turkey on some aspects. And as a result, the EU looks at Turkey as, other analysts have gone to the point of saying that the EU, Turkey is going to join the Eastern Bloc. You see that old dichotomy of the Cold War is coming up again. I made this example of Turkey on purpose, but there's still going to be multifaceted dynamics as new members come in. But what will that do? Some of the joining members, they've got their own resources, which are going to put those resources in the bigger table of BRICS. Now, there's another thing with BRICS. Why is it BRICS so attractive? BRICS, I've already said, it's inclusive. There is no membership. There is no membership fee to BRICS. There is no joining fee to BRICS. Now, that plays a very big role. which also forces BRICS to hit the ground running. No membership fee, no entrance fee. Who is the leader of BRICS? BRICS, as it holds summits everywhere, it means it's a rotating formation. And many members are coming in. We're going to have new additional members. Now, BRICS has to find a way of establishing consensus, because the more the nations, the more the views. And remember that all of these countries have got their own ways of governance. And BRICS speaks of that there are no conditionalities on how you run your sovereign states. As long as you are at the periphery and you are part at the periphery of the leading global economic systems and you are not allowed in, you are welcome within BRICS as a member of the global south. What is interesting for me, and which is going to be the challenge for BRICS, is that are we going to see nations with higher GDP calling the shots? Or are we going to find a way of establishing consensus as a system? This brings us to another question, of course. The time of abstraction of BRICS is gone now. So we can say the time of BRICS being an international members club is gone. Now, BRICS has to manifest and function as a global laboratory where we have systems to run this new configuration. Because as I mentioned, the dichotomy of the Cold War era is coming back as BRICS grows bigger. But BRICS is attractive. So it is the owners are on BRICS to establish systems and put systems in place. Thus, there is hope, and I'm positive that already, I can't mark the date exactly, that the BRICS card was out already in some of the press summit engagements, that people could use that card. You scan the QR code, you put it into your phone, you register your own phone, you register everything, and then you can use your phone to buy at selected stores. That's an improvement. What does that tell you? It means if that card is going to be permanent, it means I can pay from South Africa, paying someone in Russia, and that money doesn't go through SWIFT. So let's talk about Ethiopia and South Africa, for example. At present, what happens? When I buy something from Ethiopia, it means my rand buys dollar. And the person I'm buying from, they have to sell in dollars, which they're going to buy back in local currency. Here in the middle, there is someone who's not involved to either parties, but because we're using his system, he also gets share of the cake. So what BRICS is doing is taking away that sort of overlord, hegemonistic third party. We can even go to rhetoric of the BRICS itself. Even when the BRICS came up in terms of media, you sit with the TV BRICS channel today, you know that before there were these formations of media outlets for BRICS, most of the news or most of ideas and analysis of BRICS, they were not from BRICS member states. They were pushed by that particular third party. And the ground for that third party to manifest now is almost gone. But the pudding is in the numbers. If we can manage to remove this middleman and have what we hope for this summit, to have people paying in their local currency within a system of global south, which BRICS is that system within an economic formation of the global south, then we will have achieved yet another success on top of the successes that I've enumerated.